New York's Metropolitan Transit Authority has announced that it will fine passengers $50 for riding mass transit barefaced. But don't worry, New Yorkers, you're still welcome to pull down your pants and shit in the middle of a busy subway train. And finally, at a 9/11 memorial in New York, Joe Biden and Mike Pence greeted one another with an elbow bump. It's refreshing to see that we're not so different. I mean, if two lily white, centrist, cisgender career politicians can be civil to one another, then there's hope for all of us. The Trump Report starts now. Hi, I'm Christian Bladt, joined as often by the one and only Scott Moore, the S-Man himself. Thanks for being here today, Scott.
That's right. It's great to be here. And I noticed you got a haircut.
I did, and I
Yay.
have it. It looks like you did. I can't tell if you did or not, but I think you did.
A couple weeks ago, but yes.
Yours is better than mine. I really don't like mine, but I got a haircut 2 months ago during those like brief couple weeks when hair salons and barbershops were open, and I didn't get it short enough.
Exactly. That's what I did too.
Yeah. So I was like, I think I got a little carried away when I gave instructions. And in about a week, it'll probably look good. But I thought that a week ago, and it doesn't. Very excited to see, by the way, in the chat, the only Storage Yard resident saying hello. And Storage Yard resident has been with us throughout the entire run of the show. I want to know what his feelings are for President Trump's prospects for re-election. You have a lot of people who feel like the support for him is being underreported and undercounted in polls and things like that. So I always like to hear directly from people who might otherwise. Where I wanted to start was kind of the least fun part of the show. Is I don't think in the 4 years we've done the show, we've ever done the show on 9/11 before. So I always think it's important to take a moment and remember, what a terrible day that was. And, it's not easily forgotten. For people who maybe don't know, I'm from New York originally. So it was very surreal for me. My dad actually flew out of Newark Airport to Buffalo that morning. And the way I found out was he called and he was leaving a message. This is the old home phone answering machine, and saying that he was fine and we didn't have anything to worry about. And I'm like, yeah, of course, fine. You just flew. What am I supposed to be worried about? And so I never had to be, terrified that my dad wasn't okay. Like, probably so many people had that. And unfortunately, we know for thousands, they never actually got to speak to their loved ones again. And it's very surreal to think about that day, because it was such a terrible day. And we can talk about what a terrible year 2020 is. And it's like 9/11 came after the 2000 election, which was such a surreal night watching those returns. And I remember thinking at that point, I'm like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I don't think we'll ever have hopefully we never have a single day like 9/11 again. But I don't think I was prepared for what 2020 had in store for us. So I don't think I think the world is only getting stranger and scarier over time. But I did, I made a little joke about it, but I did think it was nice that, Biden and Pence could at least do a little elbow bump, running into each other at a 9/11 event. I feel like Trump probably wouldn't have. I'm just guessing, maybe, but that's my feeling. But yeah, and I think the crazy thing to think about is the fact that it's 19 years ago, so next year will be the 20th anniversary of that terrible day. And it's just, I think that, you definitely have kind of the narrative that there are people that don't want to talk about it anymore. People are, and then you still have people who really need to debate what it was that happened. A writer that I know, he writes for Tell, he's conservative, his name is Kurt Schlichter, and he tweeted out that 9/11 truthers will be blocked. And I was curious, and I read his mentions, and apparently he had a lot of 9/11 truthers who followed him who were upset that he took that stand. And to me, it just seems weird to think about that's still so important to so many people that I mean, look, President Trump even used this against Jeb Bush. He did say like that his dad caused 9/11. Not his dad, his brother, but he could have said his dad. That's the odd thing.
Would have been,
And and you'll have people that swear it's like, well, no, they needed to knock down those buildings and melt down the steel, and they'll just believe it the way that you believe something that remember happening in your life. So I don't know how to talk to people that think like that, and I think that it's unfortunately it's an allegory for, I think, politics, where it's getting harder for people to be able to talk to each other instead of easier. So I don't know if you had any thoughts, Scott, one about 9/11 or what we've seen. President Trump was at the site in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and later in the morning, former Vice President Joe Biden was there. I did almost call him President Biden, but it's. Yeah. So I think that, I mean, and it's a fascinating part of the story, the United Flight 93, that there was something much worse that was going to happen that day that didn't, because of those people on that plane. So it's always a somber reminder of a terrible day. And what do you think about sort of the day in general and what we've seen from our candidates? And that includes Pence as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I will always remember it vividly. The crazy thing was, I had just moved back from New York. I was had been up at St. John's University, and actually, the crazy thing was that fall, if I had stayed up there, I would have been doing an MTV internship, and I would have been working in their radio and TV station. I don't know if it would have been that day or that morning, but they had a big tower right there at the World Trade Center. And I often thought about that. I was like, I could have very easily been there that morning, just going in to go to class and go to the radio TV station there. And my dad's a pilot for American Airlines, and I heard from a bunch of people that morning. Thankfully, he was off work and he flies internationally. But it was still one of those surreal things, being able to think like, oh my gosh, that could have very easily happened. My dad could have been flying out, from New York, and I've known a lot of people that would be flying out on that particular day. So being able to see something like that, I don't think any of us had ever envisioned becoming a reality. Like, that was the most nightmare scenario, that planes would be taken over and be used as weapons, was just not in anyone's comprehension. At the time, it just seemed like something out of a movie. It just did not seem real. So I think for a lot of us, it was just an unbelievable nightmare that no one had ever thought could happen. And like you said, since 2000, we've seen so many other things that have things that we never thought we'd see before too. I mean, it was just, you go even to 2005 and you think worst case scenario with Hurricane Katrina having New Orleans flood, like that just seemed like something that could never happen. So we've seen a lot of that kind of stuff. I think the difference now is we're getting to a point, not only with social media, but now that these attacks are more distant, you have a lot of people that are now graduating college and are going out into the world now, that were small kids that don't have a recollection of anything pre 9/11. And, so now that it's becoming more in the rearview mirror, a lot of people now are coming up with conspiracy theories, and we have our niche communities and, echo chambers where we get further away from where we were after 9/11, where the whole country really could come together. I mean, like you said, we had just come after less than a year after a very contentious election, the closest since 1876. And we were all still able to come together. And even George W. Bush had nearly 90% approval ratings. And we really came together as a country. And I thought maybe we'd see a similar thing happen with the pandemic this year, that we'd be like, okay, as Americans, we're going to come together and we're going to do what we've always done in the past and resolve this. And unfortunately, seeing that did not happen this year makes it seem like it will be harder and harder when these things happen in, God forbid, in the future, other types of calamitous events. Are we going to be able to come together as a country, or are we all going to split off into our, individual areas? I don't know. Maybe something as horrible as a terrorist event would reawaken people to work collaboratively. I think and worked to overcome this. Because I think before 9/11, yes, we had, the smaller attack in 93 and Oklahoma City in 95, but I think that was the first time we really saw that we could be affected by terrorism, where before, to a larger scale, where before it was more like, oh, that's somewhere else, that's in the Middle East, or that's in Africa, or that's, it doesn't affect us in the US. And I think that was a real wake up call. And I don't know if God forbid something like this happened again, would we be able to come together, or is it going to be more like the pandemic and people are going to split off, which is what we've seen, unfortunately, this year. And it's become politicized, which it really shouldn't have been ever. It should have been something where we work together as Americans and not as Republicans, Democrats, or whatever to solve the issues. And that hasn't happened. So it's unfortunate that we've gotten to that point.
Yeah, and look, I think that it is a great parallel for the pandemic because I think in general people definitely remember, we pitched a lot of commercials and things about how we're all in this together, but for this, we don't really feel like we're all in it together. It feels like we're actually splintered more than ever. But in 9/11, at 9/11, I feel like people really did feel like they were in it together. And, it is so different. And, you're talking about sort of the way it's so politicized here, even in, fairly contentious comparable societies. Like a great example would be the UK. There's at least agreement on how they're handling it. I think that, uh, Boris Johnson. I did almost call him Boris Yeltsin. That's why I stumbled for a second. So there's a blast from the past for you, Scott.
Right.
Boris Johnson is a very divisive figure, very much like President Trump, and not just because he has a terrible haircut. There are some similarities, in the way that he's viewed there. But I think when it comes to just sort of big picture policy, and maybe it's because it's a parliamentary system instead of a president, there at least seems to be from afar less politicized, and you see that throughout Europe. That you're seeing that when the statistics start to go up again, people don't feel like that means, oh, well, we should open more things. So it is very interesting, and I do want to know something that I feel that this was an endorsement that President Trump feels like he could have done without. Noor bin Laden, who was Osama bin Laden's niece, did write a letter to us, the American people, letting us know that we're at the very edge of a precipice, and with President Trump at her helm, America stands a chance of restoring her principles. I think on the week of 9/11, getting an endorsement from Osama bin Laden's niece is not something that's particularly helpful to the president. I think in general, he does like when people come out and show their support for him, but I don't think he was looking for this. Are you familiar with the comments that I guess we call her Ms. Bin Laden, which just seems weird, but are you familiar with what she said and what she was trying to say, Scott?
I did. I heard about it, and like everybody, even for him, obviously he wouldn't have wanted that endorsement. But the thing is that I would say, though, not to defend her endorsement or not, but he comes from a very large family, and not, I would say, everyone subscribing to that type of extreme viewpoints that he did. And not, again, saying that's okay that she's giving an endorsement or not, but just for a little bit of a perspective that, it, it may not be that they're subscribing to the same theories. It'd be like if Hitler's relative came out and said, I'm supporting Donald Trump. Like, yes, that looks horrible, but, what are his descendants or people doing now today? Or what are some of these other extended family members doing? So I don't know that her quote unquote endorsement carries a lot of weight in that sense of being negative or positive. It'd be one thing if he was still alive and he's endorsing him. That's a whole other thing. So I think that kind of has to be taken with a grain of salt. Like, yes, I read it, but I was like, okay, it's an extended family member, it's not even his daughter. So, I didn't really go too deep into it.
You hit the nail right on the head for what I was thinking. It's as though Jimmy Hitler came out and said, here's who I think you should vote for. It's like having that name is definitely, we're talking about it. So, that definitely was a bit of an attention grabber. I want to get a few comments that are in the chat from our friend Storage Yard Resident. he does make an interesting point, which is you need to address President Trump as our favorite president. I haven't heard him say that in a while, but he did used to say you're and what I will say to that storage yard resident is I've never seen somebody happier to find a poll that shows him with 51% popularity than President Trump, because you see so many that are much worse. He's very excited by the 51 and 52%, which usually traditionally those are ones that you're going to want to bury. You're not going to want to show those. Storage yard resident asked the question, why would anybody want Sleepy Joe Biden for president? I think you have a lot of people who don't love Joe Biden, but what I say to people that when they think about this is like, this is a guy who seems confused. Like, do you want a president who doesn't know what room he's in? You hear a lot of that narrative. Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes, many people do, because they already know what they get with the alternative. And, the 2016 election was characterized as voting for Hillary or not Hillary. And a lot of people voted not Hillary. And this is the reverse. It's Trump or not Trump. And it's basically, if it was if it was going to be sort of like some kind of like revolving door of a president by committee or something, if it was just a blank line and it did just say not Trump, I think a lot of people would probably vote that way. And then why would anybody want phony Kamala Harris for vice president? I think that, a lot of people, again, she's probably not a lot of people's first choice, but I think that there's just excitement that, you have that level of inclusion on the ticket. And then Storage Yard goes on to talk about the amount of refugees that Joe Biden in. And President Trump wants to cut down on the amount of immigration. So I did want to know sort of the things that people like Storage Yard are thinking, because I know immigration is not something that you hear about in the news much right now, but it's still very much a concern for people that are likely to vote for President Trump, like I assume Storage Yard resident is. Storage Yard resident, because you are our viewer who is in the Trump camp, let us know if you feel comfortable voting by mail. Do you feel like it's going to be counted? Do you feel like you need to vote in person when it comes around? I guess I had the number of days earlier in the week, and now I don't know. It's like 50 days. It's maybe 50, a little bit more than that, but
yeah, probably like 52. I have to look too, because I usually track it by saying how many days we have left till we fire him.
Right, but then if that happens, or however it happens, there's always the long goodbye of the couple more months of hanging in there.
52 days, yes.
And since we're talking about voting, I know that Scott will appreciate this. I want to show off something that I got. This is a mask from the University of Virginia Center for Politics. I follow someone that we both enjoy reading from, Larry Sabato. And so they have these masks that you can get. They can't charge for them because they're not for profit, but they suggest you could also make a donation. And this is what it says. Vote on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay at home. So it's a very wordy face mask that I thought you would think was funny. And here's what I'll say about that. That is a non-political mask. People who feel that Joe Biden would be very bad for the country feel exactly I think that's the common ground for people that are voting. They all feel it's just as important to not have the other guy be the one to be president come January 21st. So anyway, I wanted to kind of move away from all of this stuff and talk about how President Trump's words have been used against him over the last week or so. And there's a couple instances of this. There was the Atlantic piece that said that President Trump disparaged fallen soldiers. He didn't want to speak at a site for World War I. And I think that it's there's definitely some conflicting information here. You have the author of Atlantic who feels well sourced, and then you had a couple other sites, including Fox News, which that was kind of an interesting way to watch that a Fox News reporter did back up his reporting. But then Fox News, the channel, tried to figure out a way to disparage the reporter without directly disparaging her. And you have a few people who I think the most honest statements, people who support him, would just say things like, he's never said anything like that around me. People that are in military service. Then you have the other people who are like, I didn't hear him say that, but it sounds like the kind of thing that I have heard him say. So obviously, we'll talk about some more of his own words in a moment. But this specific instance, what do you think about this? Well, this controversy that he disparaged the military, which I think is, at least the perception is that it is a constituency very important to his reelection would be his support of the military.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, that's why we saw everybody jumping quickly to his defense on Twitter and social media, from everyone from Sarah Huckabee Sanders to, to obviously Kayleigh, the current press secretary. It's Kellyanne, who's already no longer working with him at the moment. Like, everybody jumped to the defense so quickly that it also immediately made me think that there was something to that, because usually, a couple people may come back and be like, oh yeah, that's false, or whatever. But the fact that they all were doing this very hardcore campaign, one, made me realize how serious it was, because of the fact that they already know that in some cases they're actually losing the military vote now to Joe Biden. And, I think that already before this even came out, it was very close. And now, seeing that, they knew they had to kind of try to quickly repair the damage. But it also made me think that there was a lot more truth to it than not, because of the fact that they all jumped on this so incredibly seriously. And like we talked about, we've seen the way he's talked about Gold Star families in the past. We've seen the way he's talked about John McCain. We've seen in the sense that him or his family have never done that sacrifice of being in the military and putting themselves there. So, he has no perspective on that maybe some other former presidents obviously do, going back to George H.W. Bush. And so you're seeing, and this kind of goes back to our 9/11 thing, the further away that people get from actually being in the military or having family members in the military makes it very difficult for someone to have the perspective of the sacrifice, things that go into it. And knowing the way he is, and that he's all about himself, and what he can get out of a situation, would lead most people to believe that he's, had some truth to what was said in that article, which is very damning for him. But at the end of the day, like we've talked about, there are so many controversies and scandals with this administration, it's hard to keep up. I mean, look, we went from that Atlantic article right on to the next thing with the Woodward book within a span of a day or two. So I think we're baked in at this point. People know what they're getting into. People know who they're voting for at this point, or against, with Trump. So at this point, there's not much else I think that can actually happen that would change the people that are hardcore supporters of him, or that are voting for him because of the policies that his administration would do, that are not going to at this point, because it's baked in. They knew that going back to 2016, and they still voted for him. So there is some baked in stuff that I don't think anything at this point is going to turn people away from. And we'll get into the social media stuff later, that I would say that will probably help him as well. But yeah, that's my thought, is that there's definitely truth to it. But
yeah, I mean, I think that it was definitely one of those, methinks thou doth protest too much. It was so quick and so much, and he really didn't let go of it in the way that, look, it could very well not be true. And in all honesty, I would rather we don't ever have a president who says that about our servicemen and women, whether they be alive, whether they have given their life in service of our country. I would like it to not be true for that reason. I would hate to think that we've ever had a president that would say anything like that. But I think that the impression of the reaction, it's hard to imagine it not being true. And I think that we definitely live in an age now where reporters know how accountable they are. I mean, Dan Rather lost his career for a story that was not very well sourced, because they were in such a rush to talk about then President Bush dodging the draft, basically, and that story turned out to not be accurate. And because, and so I think you get a lot of that. Now, when it comes to the Woodward book, this was one of those ones where they were like, well, I never said that. Why don't you put the tapes out? And in this case, I believe I didn't hear them, but I read that Bob Woodward did indeed. He was more than happy to make those recordings available. That's a little different because that is, here's the president saying this. For the Atlantic piece, it is a source that they don't want to give up. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that people who support the president feel that they should be there. They should be able to say who. It really depends on who this person is. This could be someone who maybe is still in government and maybe even someone that's relatively close to the president. Yeah, that's right. It could be Jared Kushner. No, but it could be someone that is just like, yeah, no, that's the agreement that they got into, is that you don't then go tell everybody that it was me who said it. So this is a little different. And then this comes back to the coronavirus, which I think that the way that the virus progressed and the way that, there were shutdowns and people have tried to, kind of get back to regular life as best they can. I think that degree of the handling, you can question what was done, but at the top, the way President Trump initially talked about it and the way that he continued to talk about it, when now you're getting the impression that he knew it was bad, but he didn't want to create a panic. When I think in the same day that he said that story broke, not the day that he said it, but when that story broke, there was a lot of talking about things that seemed designed to create a panic out in the suburbs about, some very real problems that I think do need to be addressed. But the fact that the president is now saying, like, yeah, I knew it was really bad, but I didn't want to worry people. But if you, in the middle of February, in the second week of March, an NBA player tested positive for it. And so the NBA shut down, and, Forrest Gump himself, Tom Hanks had it. So, that's the same day. So that was the day, and I think it's March 11th. It's March 10th or 11th. It's one of those days. That's the point when everybody's like, oh, wait, this is real. Okay. And like, cause you'd seen like, oh, that looks really bad what's happening in China. And oh, they're not handling it well in Italy. Kind of remember doing some light research about what was happening in Italy, telling jokes on this show about, sort of the way that the Italian people were sort of, coming together. I remember like YouPorn was making their website for free for people in Italy. So it all seemed kind of far away and very funny. I mean, I don't remember exactly what my joke was. That's probably because it wasn't that great, but I remember sort of what the narrative was in the middle of February. And we were still having, Democratic debates with like 10 people on the stage. And I'm not even talking about that, a germ policy. It's just, it was such a different look at the world. So when you hear that Bob Woodward, who is, I don't know, there are a lot of, there's a lot of reporters that I think people tend to cast aspersions on, and it's based on, where their political ideologies are. You have people that would, somebody like Chris Wallace, who we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to the debates. And you have people on the right who hate like Jake Tapper or Wolf Blitzer, but I think when it comes to somebody like Bob Woodward, just how he became well known in his involvement in Watergate, the story, the reporting, I don't know that anybody's an unimpeachable witness anymore, but this is a guy where you feel like if he's putting this in his book, it's because he knows he can back it up. So, Scott, just generally speaking, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I mean, what he said in the book and having the tapes of the audio of Trump saying these things is incredibly damning for him. Like, we will not minimize that. That is definitely damning. The thing is, though, when people have, like I was saying earlier, social media, and we're sort of in this post-truth era, like we were saying 20 years ago, 19 years ago with 9/11, and even the 2000 election, we still did not have quite the separation. That was before smartphones and all that things, all the different media, the echo chambers, all that. And today we have this post-truth society, so you can go anywhere to get your opinion validated. And so there's a lot of sites now that people can go to and basically say, okay, Trump just didn't want to panic everyone. That's so great. What a great leader, and that sort of thing. Where, like you said, but on the flip side, he's sitting there talking about how the whole country is going to become an absolute disaster with Biden, and only Republicans and him can protect everyone, and all these things about creating this fake panic. But yet you see in how he downplayed the virus, which was incredibly damning. There's no two ways about it, but it's so easy for people to go to their post-truth social media corner and get what they want to hear. And if you look up just daily hits on, who's going to the most pages and things on like Facebook alone, most of them are Ben Shapiro, which is, right-leaning, obviously, and Donald Trump, Franklin Graham, a lot of very right-leaning places are where the majority of people are going to get their news and their information from on Facebook alone. So when you have that happening, you have a way of being able to have that post-truth, to where I was saying earlier, you're really going to minimize the fallout of people not voting for him. Whereas in the past, Trump would have done so many different things now that would have made him ineligible to even be a worthy candidate right now. I mean, in the past, you would think this would be like a 1980 type election where the incumbent would lose by a huge landslide if we were talking about, not having all of our camps and social media to go to. The other downside to this, though, is that to me brings it down a peg for Bob Woodward, much like John Bolton is. They were sitting on very important information that they decided not to release because it would affect their book sales. And so to me, that's problematic in another sense. Like, Bob Woodward had very important information that I would have been like, hey, can I get this information out, maybe in March or April, to be able to say, hey, this is so important and we need to get a coherent strategy, that I'm going to forego my book sales a bit, because there's so much other things I'm talking about in here that you'll still love to read my book. And it's the same thing with John Bolton. If he really, felt he had something to say, he didn't, and he waited to get the most that he could out of the book sales. So that's also problematic in my opinion. As much as I love Bob Woodward,
I think in both cases,
sure.
Yeah, I think in both of those cases, the books still would have sold at least comparable to what they sold. I think it would have been less reporters buying the books to find every word that they can use in it. But I think that that is a great point. That it could have certainly been helpful. I guess the sort of the rebuttal would be, well, think about how much less helpful it would be if I told people about this in December, after the election. So, there's at least that and maybe it is calculated that maybe it's like, closer to the election is more useful, because stories that broke in May might be different. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what we were talking about on this show in May. Other than the fact that we were talking about the virus, I know that.
Right.
But,
right.
So I think that the president's words have been used against him before. There are people who care. There are people who don't care. And those are people who are there's nothing that could happen in the next 50 plus days that'll change their mind. And, it was interesting, you referenced 1980, which is something that I was alive from, certainly don't remember. I was 4 by the time the election rolled around. But what I know in the years since is that actually, Jerry was leading Reagan into October, and there was a poor debate performance, and then sort of the hostage situation, unfortunately hitting a crescendo there, and the very symbolic release of the hostages as Reagan is sworn in on Inauguration Day, 1981. So it is always a reminder of how different things can change. And we see a lot of poll numbers, and I think that people are a little bit more apprehensive when they see the poll numbers, especially after 2016. But if you remember, the polling heading into 2012 was not entirely accurate. I think that on election day, you had a lot of people that had very real expectation that Mitt Romney was going to win, that President Obama was not going to get elected because he was very unpopular with a segment of the country, the way that this president is. And I know we only referenced it about 2 weeks ago, but sometimes the information you have is so hard to believe that we did have Karl Rove on Fox News on election night telling them that they should not be calling the election because his sources are better. So, it'll be fascinating to see that. Look, November 3rd is not going to be the end of this story. I think that we've got at least a week. I think that if there's a massive voter turnout and either one of these guys is going to win with, say, 60%, then it might be over within a week. But I feel like it's probably going to be a little closer than that. And we'll see.
Yeah.
But when you go ahead. What were you going to say, Scott?
No, I was going to say, but going back to that 1980 thing, well, first of all, I was a baby, so I definitely want to remember it. But going back to that, even 84, we're just not seeing these type of landslide elections that we had seen in the past. And again, from politicization, I can't even speak now. But, again, going back to everyone having their own camps and everything, the way that in the past where you could see, okay, multiple states going towards one candidate or another in a huge landslide type election is just not really in the cards anymore. So every election is going to be very close regardless. And again, I think it's still going to be close in this case, but some of this news will have an effect. And the difference from 2016 to now, like you were saying, is it's more of a referendum on Trump, where before it was sort of like, and as we've talked about, it's hard to get a third term of the same political party in the White House in general. So you already have that working against you, which Hillary Clinton would have been a continuation third term of a Democrat. So you already have that built in, and you had her baggage and other things in there that made it difficult. And Trump was still somewhat, I want to say, an unknown in the sense he had no record. He was not in politics before.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was a very known figure, but as a political entity, he was a complete unknown. Yeah.
And he had no record for anyone to base on. So if they were looking at the two, they're like, like you said, and now it's a little bit different than 2016. So some of the people that thin sliver of voters might be more, malleable and changing, which, we looked at the Electoral College, and when you look at the polls and everything, they were pretty close by the end because they had her winning a little more than she did, but it was like 3% or so, and she won by like 2.5% when you talk about popular vote. But if there's some changes in some of those key states, that will easily be able to flip it back to Biden or so. And there's some polls that have it so close that the second district in Nebraska and Maine could be the ones to put it over the top for one candidate or the other. So it's crazy that there are a lot of scenarios where it becomes almost an electoral college tie or very close, and then we go back to 2000 where it was 271 to 267 or 266. So you just see, some of these scenarios really could play out again too. Or like you said, it could break for one candidate or another in the last couple of weeks, like what happened in 2016. And it's a little bit more straightforward in the Electoral College win. But it's definitely going to be closer than not in the more likelihood, because we just don't have those type of landslide elections anymore with one candidate or another, with the way we're so hyper partisan now. So, that's always going to keep it close regardless.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is at the center of really three of the elections that we're referencing here, 80, 84, and 88, just sort of the presence that Reagan was within the country, basically being his vice president easily pushed HW over the top. Mike Dukakis, not a strong candidate. Walter Mondale, also not a strong candidate. That plays in. And honestly, Joe Biden, not a strong candidate, but strong enough, because of where we're at. But it's something that we have to watch unfold. And I think that I'm not 100% sure that we're still going to get 3 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate, but I'm looking forward to them. I feel like we might at least get the first one. We'll see what happens. And there was so we had the announcement for it. The first will be Tuesday, September 29th. And I think our plan will be to do this show that night afterwards so that we can watch it. That one will be in Cleveland. The moderator is Chris Wallace. I have to be honest, he's the only one that I am familiar with. I can't say I've never heard any of these other names. Like Susan Page,
Right.
actually, I think is
Yeah.
someone I've heard. But Steve Scully, I don't know. Kristen Welker, I looked her up, and she's NBC's White House correspondent. And I don't mean to disparage the people I don't know. I was just surprised at the names, and I think that because Chris Wallace works for Fox, I think a lot of people are very quick to point at him. But people on the right are very quick to point about the fact that he works for Fox, but they feel like he's a huge lefty. And I look at your political figures like your Chris Wallaces and your Tim Russerts. If both sides of the equation think that they've got it in the bag, or the opposite of that they've got it in for their candidate, that they're a homer for the other party, they're probably doing a good job. It's sort of like when there's a playoff game, a national sports announcer a perfect example to get really into the minutia, Tim McCarver, who would broadcast the World Series for Fox and the playoffs. Red Sox fans would always say he's the most anti-Red Sox announcer they've ever had to listen to. Whereas Yankee fans would say he's the most anti-Yankee announcer they've ever heard. So I'm like, well, then he probably did a decent job because you both hated him. He probably just said things that you didn't want to hear. And I think that, Chris Wallace is very tough on everyone. And also, he has been trying to get Joe Biden on his show, and Joe Biden has dodged him. So that's sort of the joke within the joke about whether or not Biden should actually show up is he going to dodge Chris Wallace one more time and just be a no-show, and while typically my understanding is that there will be no crowd in attendance for these. If you've heard otherwise, let me know, Scott. But while I couldn't find 100% proof that was the case, I couldn't imagine that was the case. So give us your thoughts on the announcements. Were you surprised of any of the names on there? Are you more familiar with any of these reporters than I am? What are your thoughts on, and we'll say who they are, Steve Scully, Kristen Welker, and Susan Page are the other moderators. And Susan Page, that's the vice presidential debate.
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I've only heard of Susan Page, but if I had the other three of them in a lineup, I probably wouldn't be able to pick them out, which is sad to say. I don't know. I'm curious how they pick the moderators. I don't know how that's done. If it's like a committee. I've always been fascinated about that because it is interesting on how they get chosen. And I know it has something to do too with picking from the various major networks as well. So I know there is a process. I just don't know how it's actually done. But of course, yeah, Chris Wallace is the only name that I know of. And I always take Chris Wallace as sort of the old school journalist. He's been around forever. He looks great, actually. He's actually like 72 or so, but he's been around for a long time. And obviously his dad was a very famous journalist. And I take him that he takes his job very seriously in that old school sort of journalism creed of trying to be as diplomatic and neutral as he possibly can, as those journalism standards were in the past, because, obviously like Walter Cronkite had his own ideas of things and voted accordingly. But, he always at least kept those old school journalism standards. And I think Chris Wallace is one of the last of that kind of mentality. So I've always looked at him as that and not like he's really purposely trying to be one side or another. And I always say that Fox News during the day does a good job on keeping it more news. And then at night, then they become the entertainment, network. And then it's definitely more entertainment rather than actual real news at that point. And you have people with very specific agendas and personalities. But the daytime, I've always thought Fox has done a good job on keeping that separate and keeping that a little bit more
I think
nuanced.
just to jump in, sort of the after Fox and Friends and before the 5, like that part of the day where it's just actual like news reporting. Yeah, I think that. And look, until recently, they had Shepard Smith in the middle of the day, and he is someone who was very much not in any kind of right-leaning lockstep. And just a quick thought on Chris Wallace about how long he's been around. He actually hosted Meet the Press before Tim Russert did. He's been around in sort of these kind of roles for a while. And, I think the fact that Joe Biden doesn't want to talk to him, and the fact that President Trump has what did he say after his interview, that he's nowhere near as good as his father or something, which Chris Wallace would probably point to the fact that he's a very different kind of reporter than his father was, and no, he's not really the same as his father. So I like the fact that neither of them like him, or at least seem not to.
And I think Joe Biden, he's scared to not scared, but probably knows that he's going to be tough on him as well, and part of, like, going back to Pete Buttigieg saying he would go to Fox. A lot of Democrats don't ever go on Fox News and everything. I think there's still that fear that it's going to be used against them and manipulated. So I know there's definitely concerns probably from Biden, but I think I do agree he should go on. And if he's going to speak with anyone at Fox News, it should be Chris Wallace, and be ready for the tough questions.
Look, when you do interviews with, if you're Joe Biden and you go on MSNBC, you're talking to people who are already voting for you. And I think that, yes, some of the primary candidates who did town halls for Fox News, they knew that they're like, look, I'm talking to people that are not going to have heard my message. Maybe even if it's a small percentage of them, even if a few of them hear what I have to say, it might resonate with what they believe in, and I do remember, Pete Buttigieg was someone, and obviously his military service being something that he thinks might have brought some appeal from Fox News. So I don't know. I think the debates will be interesting because they are not going to be what a year ago President Trump was expecting, which would be, well, maybe somewhat other than Joe Biden, but also what he does best. I mean, the large crowds, and even the medium-sized crowds that he's doing these rallies kind of on the tarmacs of airports right now. That's the place where he's getting people to show up. And interestingly, this is very much an aside, but I saw that Nevada actually canceled two of those like airport rallies because they didn't like the protocols that were used at other ones. And it's you see all these people that are at events like that without masks, and the outdoor ones, I don't know, we're 2 weeks out from his campaign speech on the White House lawn, and I think that if there were perhaps a large number of infections from that event, I do believe the media wouldn't be taking their time to, not tell us those. So you do wonder about, what they are doing in these places, and whether or not they are safer. But then, you hear about the huge, very different event, but you hear about the huge Sturgis motorcycle rally, and that there were like hundreds of thousands of new cases that will cost taxpayers, or already cost taxpayers $12 billion. So you still hear about big outbreaks. You hear about outbreaks on college campuses, which, I think trying to trust college age children to behave responsibly for the first time in their lives, being out of their house, especially after the last 6 months, it's maybe a little bit of a tall order. So I think that's why we're seeing those things there. So but that brings us back to, President Trump does well. The bigger the crowd, the more in this element he is. So I think these will be the most substantive debates we've had in a long time. And, I think that it's not like we didn't get good things out of them, but the 2016 debates, like with Trump walking around behind Hillary, it was all very distracting, and I've put a lot of it out of my mind. But I'm just disappointed, as I assume Scott would be. We're not getting any Jim Lehrer for obvious reasons. That we're not getting any Lehrer moderation.
Right.
But
I know.
Yeah,
man, loved him.
Yeah, he was always great, and
He was.
But I don't know. I think that Chris Wallace is a good choice, and then as these other debates happen, we'll be able to react and know more. So just a quick rundown on what they are. Tuesday, September 29th, which is a little bit more than 2 weeks from now. Thursday, October 15th. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I have them in the wrong order. Wednesday, October 7th is the VP debate. So we'll have one
Yep.
presidential debate, then our only VP debate, which I think a lot of people are excited about.
Hmm.
Uh, Thursday, October 15th is in Miami, Florida. Then Thursday, October 22nd, just a week later, in Nashville, Tennessee. So we've got one a week starting in just a couple weeks. So we'll obviously be very focused on those here on the show, and we will go from there. And I think that I guess the best place to wind things down here is we're seeing specifically in this western part of the United States we like that we live in. We do like it because we live here, but I didn't mean to say that the number of wildfires there are, and just what a tremendous issue that is for people in these states. I mean, when you see, just look, I mean, Southern California is somewhere that you have wildfires somewhat regularly. Like we had smoke in the air fairly thick yesterday. It's not as bad today, but in Burbank, we're not that close to where the fires are. I think the closest one is in Azusa, and that's like, I don't know, 30, 40 miles away. And so you see that, but then those visuals of San Francisco, which is not, the city itself is not somewhere that you ever see engulfed in smoke like that. And it's very eerie. And I think that even for people who feel as global warming is not or climate change, whatever you want to call it, people who feel that it is not caused by man, I think you could try to push past that for just a minute and try and figure out, like, okay, but what do we do about it? Let's worry about who caused it another time. Let's figure out what can we do, because look, these are places for the most part where fires have happened before. But I don't think it's that, look, we're seeing hurricanes in places that you don't expect. I had friends in the Northeast who experienced tornadoes that had never seen them before. So, our weather is only getting worse. It's very easy for people to, there's a lot of things to make fun about Al Gore, but he was at the forefront of this issue a very long time ago. And maybe he took his projections too far, but when he said that the island of Manhattan would be underwater, and only a few years later you did have the storm Sandy, there are elements to those projections that, as crazy as some people found them to be, that it turned out to be true. And it's not like Al Gore scientist did this research himself. He just presented it to us. So I think that these are issues that people shouldn't forget about. It's hard to really come past anything of like, yeah, I just want this virus to go away. I get that that's kind of the big thing. It's like, if the virus goes away, the economy will be better, people will be happier, the kids will be in school, all the things that come down from the from the pyramid scheme of
Hmm.
basically fixing the COVID pyramid scheme. You fix that at the top, everything is going to be fine. It's going to at least be better. So Scott, I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about, when you see these out of control fires, which, look, they're an annual occurrence in Southern California, but I mean, I think I was reading that 10% of residents of Oregon have had to evacuate. I mean, and it's a huge number, and you're seeing them on a scale that we're not used to seeing. So I just wanted
Right.
to let you weigh in on all of this, really.
Well, that's the difference, is that, like you said, yes, it's a seasonal thing. We have fire season, usually September, October, November. Santa Ana winds down here, Diablo winds up in Northern California. The difference is we've already burned more acreage ever in the history of California before really the start of the traditional fire season. We've already number one on over 3 million acres. The other thing is there's at least 5 or 6 fires that are now the top 10 of all the fires ever as well, that have just happened in the past month here in California. So this is at a whole other level than anything we've ever seen in the past. And just last weekend, LA County, 2 miles down the street from my house, had 121-degree temperature, which was the hottest ever recorded. My house was officially 122. So these type of extreme weather events are happening more and more often. And as I was saying some the other day, that 121 record will probably be surpassed again in another couple years. It was 14 years between the last record of 119. But we've seen since the year 2000 that we continuously have the hottest temperatures ever recorded on the Earth. Right now, hurricane season in the Atlantic, we're almost already through the entire alphabet that we normally use. We only have a handful of names left before we move into the Greek alphabet, and we're not even at the peak, or we're just now basically at the peak as of today, actually, for hurricane season. And so we still have several months to go, and we're already going to be through the alphabet. So you see these things, and they're happening in real time to levels that we have not seen before. And that should make everyone take pause. And again, like you said, not just saying, okay, did we cause it or affect it, but what can we do to slow this down? Because it's going to get worse and worse, which is rather scary to think about, that if this is just the beginning of more apocalyptic fires and extreme weather events, it's going to be very scary for us, not only here in the US, but around the world, because these are just going to continue to increase with more and more regularly, happening. So it's definitely something that I think a lot of people have noticed now. Like you said, up and down the West Coast now, it's becoming quite real, and it's only going to get worse unless we really work together to come up with some solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you would want it to be the at least find solutions to be a nonpartisan issue, but as we've already
Hmm.
discussed in the
Right.
course of this past hour, that there are no nonpartisan issues at this point. Yeah, when you hear a temperature of 122 degrees, that's supposed to be recorded at Death Valley, the hottest
Right.
place on the planet, and instead it's like at the parking lot for the Cheesecake Factory in Woodland Hills, and you're
Right.
like, oh, I don't think it's supposed to get that hot there. And honestly, for what you're talking about, there's only been a few years since 119. I think in our lifetime we will see 130-degree temperature. And
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't in Las Vegas. This isn't in Phoenix. This is in parts of Southern California that are, that you would think would be a little cooler than that. So yeah, I just
Yeah.
think that it is not the major issue, I think, for the majority of voters, but I do expect it'll be hard for it to not come up. And I don't know that Joe Biden has the best record on it, but I think that, I guess, when you point to what the alternatives record is, there's that. Before we actually go, I wanted to ask the Storage Yard resident to talk about this. I wanted to ask him about voting, and he has a few posts. So he voted by mail for the March 2020 primary and mailed the ballot at the post office, which sounds great. He received an email to check on his vote and found out that my ballot was never received by the county. And then he called the county voting office, and they verified that his ballot was never received. And he says that he was told to contact the post office and find out why the ballot was not mailed to the county vote office. So he says that Trump is right about voting by mail. I just wanted to share his experience. I have voted absentee before, which I know is different. I know that that's not the same thing, but I don't know. Are we getting the option of voting in person, Scott, or
Yeah.
do we have to vote by mail?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can still
No,
go
we
vote
can
in
vote in
person.
person. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm inclined to put on the Devo hazmat suit and go to the polling place, because I want to actually see like how many people are there. I mean, to the degree. Go ahead.
Yeah, I always go vote in person personally. I revolve my schedule, my travel schedule around it. That I always go in person, but that's me. But I don't believe, again, like Donald Trump does, he might base something in a nugget of truth, but it's not as much of an issue as he claims it to be. Just like voter fraud is not an issue that people claim it to be either. So I think it's still the way to do it. But yes, I wouldn't necessarily trust the post office at this point, because we've seen how it's been politicized as well. And that if you can, you should go in person and drop off your vote, so you know that at least it's going to be counted. So that way you don't have to wait in line. But you can still make sure that you drop it off, and that it gets counted that way. Because that is going to be the thing. I think if it could also be overwhelmed, regardless of the politicizing of the post office, it could just be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
If millions of more people are going to be voting, by mail this year. So.
Yeah, which I think it's understandable that more people are going to want to vote by mail. I feel that I would be taking the right level of precautions for myself. I would probably not just wear my University of Virginia mask to the polls, but also lots of gloves and hand sanitizer. So our final comment comes from Jason Lee Beckwith. We appreciate seeing him there. And he was watching on Facebook, which you can also watch the show on Facebook when we are able to do it live like this. And it is a simple solution: abolish the Electoral College, go with the popular vote only, outlaw exit polling and no results until the voting ends in all states. They did adapt, they did amend how they reported exit polling. I know that when we go back to the 1980 election, you had a lot of people on the West Coast that didn't vote. It would not have swung the election, I don't think. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't think anybody thinks that it would have, but they called the election before the polls in the West Coast were open. Before they were closed. And and I do think that they're fairly responsible about that. You know, as soon as the polls close in states, that's when they say, here's our projection for that state. You know,
if they can,
right? Yeah, if they can. Yeah, which usually these are like too close to call, but it depends on what the race is. Anyway, Scott, we will be back next week, and hopefully Tamara will be able to be with us. And Chelsea has gotten very busy, but I really want to be able to get her thoughts on some of these debates when they happen. So we'll try and work around her schedule. But Scott, if people want to keep in touch with you, where do they do that?
They can find me on Twitter at sman80. That's SMAN80.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ, like it says right there on the screen. And you can follow me there to find out when we'll have our next episode of this show. I think we'll be back on Tuesday, but our temperature, our schedules are very much in flux, and mine was indeed because of those high temperatures. I thought we were going to do the show on Tuesday, and Scott's talking about 122. It was only 116 in Burbank, a balmy 116, and I needed to get my air conditioning fixed as a result of that. So that's why we're here today. But we do hope to get back to Tuesdays, and we will definitely be doing a show that Tuesday, 29th, after the first debate. So please subscribe to this channel, the Blattcast YouTube channel, for those that are watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on Facebook, go over to Blattcast, BLADTCAST. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks so much to everybody in the chat. And we will see you next time.